Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for coming on the Thrival Nutrition podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. Just start off with who you are and what you do.
Well, Susan Phariss, I'm a neurodevelopmental specialist. So that means that I help people grow more brain cells in very strategic areas. So I'm able to help kids with learning and behavior challenges.
Awesome. Awesome. And what brought you into this field?
Well, first it was my husband. He'd had a head injury at age 6 and was unable to read all of his life. And I read about this method and I just had this inner knowing that it was going to help him, and it did. What I didn't know is that it was going to completely turn my life around because I had extreme anxiety since the death of my first husband. And this turned all of that around after 10 years. It turned my life around, and it was such a profound change for both of us that we just had to help others do the same thing.
Wow, that's a really powerful story. A lot of pain, I'm sure, behind the story, but as everything is so cliche, everything happens for a reason, right? And
Right.
you are here and changing lives, especially kids. So tell me about your practice and, how long you've been doing it. It sounds like you've been doing it for a while.
I've been doing it for 10 years now. And
Wow.
before that, I was an engineer. And then I was in nonprofit leadership, running a service dog school. So I had gone from engineering, which is great, really used the left side of my brain, to serving others, which is truly my passion. And first I did it through the service dogs, and then we discovered this method, and this is so incredibly rewarding to be able to change kids' lives so that the rest of their life they're going to be more successful and have self-esteem.
I
And
love that.
kind of what it boils down to is getting the blocks out of the way so that they can be the best and brightest they could possibly be.
That's awesome. Me too. As working with kids and families, I love working at that really young level because you're like creating this foundation for them, whether it's nutrition or lifestyle, whatever it is. And it's like so empowering because you know that you're raising the next generation up to be like, obviously, when we're gone, they're going to be the ones leading. So it's very important. How would you describe your typical client?
Super bright. Typical client is super bright, but they are struggling with one or more subjects in school or behavior. So a really typical one would be super bright and struggling with reading, or with all of their subjects a little bit because they can't pay attention, or anxiety. So those are, the ADD, dyslexia, anxiety, those are the heavy hitters of who we're working with. But it's so confusing for parents and teachers because the kid's so bright. So why aren't they applying themselves the way they think they should be able to? And it's because they don't have a fully developed brain to be able to be all that they can be. They're missing some wiring, and we're able to go in and put that wiring in.
Nice. So is that what you would say is going on when kids that have ADD and ADHD, like ultimately like on a science level, like what's going on in the brain?
So specifically with ADD, yes, they are missing some of the connections in their brain, and we're able to use movement to very strategically build that pathway so that they can have focus and concentration.
Wow. I know it sounds simple, but I'm sure a lot of what you have to do is complicated. And how long do you typically work with a child for them to see, improvement in their school and social and
Right. It varies a little bit depending on how young we get them or how old we get them or how severe it is. So a really mild case might be just 8 weeks, and a more typical case is 8 months. And we see them once a week or a couple times a month and teach the mom and the child how to do some really fun, playful exercises. And then they go home and they do those at a maximum of 20 minutes a day, and not necessarily every day of the week. And at the end of that period of time, they have built that new connection, and they've done it long enough to make it permanent, because we can get relief pretty quickly. But we've got to keep doing the exercises long enough that the brain recognizes, oh, you want this to be permanent? Well, then I'm going to myelinate that new connection, and now we've got something that's going to stay.
Right, right. Do you usually go to like their school or do they come to you or you go to them?
I usually go to them. We've got some
Okay.
clients, we've got a little studio in Round Rock that we see a few
Okay.
of our clients. But because anxiety is such an issue for most of them, we typically go to their home and do everything there so that there's no traffic issues, there's no stress about getting there and getting back. We just go in, do fun things, and make sure mom gets it, and then they are wanting to do the exercises during the week, typically.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. And then like what's different? Because I know there's different occupations. What's different with you and then like an occupational therapist, speech therapist, behavior
Okay,
analyst that helps with like kids that kind of do the same thing, ADD, ADHD, autism. What makes you different?
that is an excellent question. What makes us different is that we are working with the primitive reflex system. And so when a baby's born and you put something in their hand, they have to grab it. That's a primitive reflex. Rolling over, that's a primitive reflex.
Right.
All of these things that, these physical movements that are kind of repetitive. You see how baby, you know how they rock when they're getting ready
Yeah.
to crawl? Okay, that's a primitive reflex. If those primitive reflexes don't turn off at age 3, now we've got problems. And we've got to address those specific systems in order to get the brain to develop. So for every one of those physical things that babies do, they're building a corresponding part in the brain.
Very interesting.
It is fascinating, and that's why this works at any age. I mean, honestly, we work with, people who've had strokes in their 80s, and we're able to get it back. And they're usually the ones that didn't respond to speech therapy or occupational therapy. Those, let's talk occupational therapy. They typically find ways to work around the problem that, if your child really reacts to this, then let's help them not be around that. We don't do any of that. We don't compensate at all. We go in, we address the root cause, which from our perspective is these primitive reflexes. We address that, and then the other problems go away. So we're working on the primitive reflexes. Physical therapists, occupational therapists, they're typically addressing the adult reflexes. It's a different system. So we just like to look at it as this is the original operating system, and we're just going to go in and we're going to use that system to get new brain growth just where we want it.
Okay, cool. Do you feel like you have any kickback like with certain kids that maybe struggle with stuff like this? We're starting to work with you like at first, like do they not enjoy it? Are they excited when like they start to do this work?
There's certainly the ones that are apprehensive about it,
Okay.
but in the first session, they realize they're kind of in control. So we give them a
Okay.
tremendous amount of power in the sessions, in that they get to choose which movements they do because they're naturally drawn to the ones that they really need.
Okay.
So we don't do, if they don't like it, we don't do it. So
Okay.
they're typically, and we've turned most of it into playful games. So it's fun. They want to do it.
Right.
Of course, there's some kids that if they are like stuck in the terrible twos, which
Right.
happens, then they're oppositional. They're resistant. It doesn't matter, oh, do you want a pony? No. Do you want an ice cream? No. So, and we're able to help those kids process on through that and get to the other side so that they're not so resistant.
Right. And I know this is probably the best working like in person, but do you ever work virtually? Like I know thankfully technology, I can see you and you can talk, but
It totally works. We've got clients all over the world.
that's
So
awesome.
I think tomorrow I'm talking to somebody in South Africa. That'll be a first. But we've got
That's
people
awesome.
all over Europe. Haven't done Asia, but we've done Europe. And then in the United States, we do clients in other states. In fact, right now I'm working with a 9-year-old boy with Down syndrome, and his mom is an occupational therapist. A little boy I worked with in Northern Ireland who we couldn't understand when we started working with them, his mom is a speech pathologist. So when they run out of resources, when what they're doing isn't working, then they start looking outside the box and find us.
Right, right. What give us an example of like one of the games or exercises that you do for kids with like ADD,
Oh,
ADHD.
I'd love to. Okay, so peacock feather. The peacock feather is an incredibly powerful tool for more things than I can even tell you here. But what you're going to want to do, let's see if I can scoot back here, is you're going to have them balance it. It doesn't matter whether it's in the palm of their hand or on a fingertip, but you're going to have them look at the top, look at the eye of the peacock feather. So your job as a parent is you're going to say over and over, look at the top, look at the top, look at the top.
Right.
So you're going to have to look at the top and balance it there. And when they're really little, then we tell them follow the feather. So when the feather leans, you follow with your hand, and that helps them get a hang of it. So, I mean, we've got 3-year-olds who can do this. So kids can't understand the word concentrate. You know, it's an intangible. And this teaches them what concentration is, because as soon as they look away, it falls.
Okay.
And we start measuring how long can they do it on this hand, how long can they do it on this hand. When they get to doing this for a minute, then we have them switch to a yardstick. And the yardstick is much faster and harder, so it's another challenge, and so they're up for that. And we just have them, again, look at the top. And you can pick up the peacock feathers at Michael's.
Oh, okay.
That's where I recommend. Hobby Lobby has them, but they've got paint all over them, a bunch of chemical stuff. We don't really like that. And they shed their peacock feathers every year, so nobody died in order for your child to have a peacock feather. Let me say a little bit more about what this does. That when you do this, you start using your peripheral vision.
Okay.
When you use your peripheral vision, that automatically turns on your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the big word for relax and recover. It's the opposite of fight or flight.
Right.
So that's one thing it does. It improves your saccadic eye movement, which is necessary for reading. It relaxes your system so that your eyes can focus up close. So this is a challenge, you know, for kids that are struggling with reading. They're in the fight or flight system, so their eyes are wired to look at the horizon for danger. And here we're asking them to look up close, and their eyes are set up to do the opposite. So by doing this, like before they go to school, as soon as they get home from school, to relax and recover from the stress of school, because it's extra hard for these kids. And then before they do any homework, and maybe in the middle of the homework, do it again so that they can get out of fight or flight and get into that relaxed place where they can actually get some work done.
That's awesome. It's so crazy. I don't even think about stuff like that. Like, I love how you put it in perspective, and it just makes sense though. Is there anything maybe that us parents, I don't want to say doing wrong, but maybe we're doing stuff when maybe we're doing something wrong when they're younger that we could, I don't know, we're not holding them back, but maybe inhibiting to make them not, grow as strong as we want. I don't like to say wrong, but maybe just something we just don't know.
Well, it's something that nobody wants to hear, but it's screens. They need to get off of screens, computer screens, laptops, your iPhone, tablets, video games. It is not your friend. It isn't. There's in, I think it's Romania, they've done studies, and it's a typical treatment for autism there, and they call it virtual autism. Because if they'll get them off of screens, they will recover. Now, this isn't going to be all kids with autism.
Right.
But, from my perspective, from brain development, if you let little kids, especially under 2, if you let them look at screens, you are preventing brain development, because they need to be looking around, and their eyes are building the connections to focus from far to near and near to far, and binocular vision and all these things that we use for reading. Using a screen for an hour a day is preventing that from happening.
Okay.
So that's one. And then the second one I would give, and this is specifically with babies, is they need to move. And again, you put them in front of a screen, they're not moving.
Right.
And if for whatever reason you leave them in a carrier a lot,
right,
you're preventing brain development.
Okay.
Because it's all based in those first 3 years, all brain development is based on movement.
Right. Right. And how does food factor into all this, of course?
Ah, yes, food. Yes, we're pretty big on that. So our recommendation across the board is gluten-free, dairy-free.
Hmm.
And if they don't see a dramatic change in the gluten-free in the first 2 weeks, typically it's within 48 hours. But if they don't see a big shift in 2 weeks, then it's grain-free.
Right. It's hard because our standard American diet obviously emphasizes a lot of grains and rice cereals very early, and it's very my big pet peeve. But I know a lot of people think like the gluten-free part is such a fad, but it's really not. And even when I start working with clients, I just take out inflammatory foods and
Yes.
possibly introduction back in the future, but to start like on a good foundation and reset, like we need to take those out for a little bit. So
Right.
I'm happy to hear that.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
And let me give you one little story. Is a little boy that we saw in Engage, and he was the poster child for oppositional defiance at 5 years old. I mean, his parents brought him to us because they knew that if somebody didn't kill him before he was 18, he would definitely be in prison. He was that obnoxious and oppositional and resistant and unworkable, and having to find different daycares because they couldn't keep him. So we said, okay, in order for you to work with us, you've got to go gluten-free. So they went gluten-free, and in the first 24 hours, there was such a dramatic change in their child that they couldn't believe it.
yeah.
I call that a $10,000 piece of advice right there, that if all you do is go gluten-free or grain-free, you are going to make a big difference in your child's ability to learn, because it causes so much inflammatory process in the cerebellum.
It is. And it's so the wheat now is just so different. And I don't even like to say it's not even just gluten, it's gliadin, it's different proteins in wheat. And it's not the same that our Jesus used to break bread and eat it with.
No, it
It's
is not.
very different nowadays. And I always like to say, I know it sounds like you'll be missing a lot. There's a lot of good alternatives though nowadays. We're so thankful for like a lot of the food companies out there that do it. What are your thoughts on probiotics and
Big,
microbiome?
big, 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 very, very important that you've got to get the probiotics, you got to get the prebiotics. So diet is essential for a healthy brain. And I mean, there are probiotics that were designed specifically for kids with autism,
Yeah.
and they're effective. So it's, the gut biome, your
It's the
gut,
second brain.
it totally is. And it controls your urges and your motivation and your drive. I've had my experience with parasites and with different gut biome issues that were, life-changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. I feel like the society is getting closer to like understanding that diet's important.
Oh,
I feel like practitioners like me and you and so many other people are finally starting to like plant that seed of like diet is important. It's not just something we can overlook.
oh,
So I
huge.
appreciate that you incorporate that into your practice.
Absolutely.
And then how can listeners get in touch with you? Where are you on social media or your website?
Okay, our website and on social media and on Facebook is Brain Fitness Strategies,
Okay.
plural. And one of the other tools that I really recommend for helping kids with focus and concentration is juggling. And most parents don't know how to juggle. So if they will go to susansfreebie.com, they
Okay.
can sign up and they will get a free excerpt from our book that teaches you as a parent how to teach them how to juggle, even if you can't.
Okay.
So it's a valuable little tool. It's a step-by-step, have them do this, have them do it 10 times. Now have them do this, have them do that 10 times. And if they're doing this is what you need to do. So it's very step-by-step. And when you sign in for that, that will also get you our newsletter. So we don't send them out very often, but we'll send out newsletters every so often.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on
You are
today.
so welcome, and I'm so glad that we have you as a resource for helping these kids get off of gluten and get on a healthy diet.
Yes, thank you.